much.
Well, you can tell us how.
Yeah. So how do I use that one? Just the queen, I guess, yeah. Hello, everybody. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country we are all meeting on today and pay my respect to the elders past, present, and emerging. So what I'm going to present today in my talk is an overview of the economic assessment framework that was developed under RRAP and customized also to CCIP. And that's used to assess different management intervention and strategies that support the resilience of the GBR. So the management intervention explored under RRAP include, for example, the use of aquaculture moving corals, and the management strategies assessed within CCIP will focus on alternative manual cost control strategies. So it's very important to know that any assessment that's done within that framework looks at the gain of an intervention relative to a counterfactual. So we always look at the difference between a counterfactual and a management strategy or intervention. So we're not looking at absolutes. Okay, let's dive in. So the economic assessment is tightly linked to a lot of other models that produce outputs that use our inputs into our economic modeling work. So let me walk you through them. So the heart of the model data that produces outputs that's really important for us, or where our models really are based on, ecological models, and more specifically reef mod. So we use reef mod outputs, and reef mod modeling is informed by a range of environmental models and data, as well as, of course, data on the interventions or strategies that are being used. Then the data that comes from reef mod, which is coral outputs, coral outcomes of different ways how it's measured, then feed into what we call coral to benefit translation models that produce indicators. And these indicators are then used in benefit models that predict or estimate benefits over a certain time frame for different streams. So we have non-use benefits. It's, for example, the value people attach to knowing that the Great Barrier Reef exists for a certain time period. And then there's also use values like tourism benefits associated with snorkeling and diving for commercial operators, or fishing benefits related to commercial, charter, or recreational fishing. Then the outputs of these benefit models can then be used in a cost-benefit analysis. So we're looking at what's the social net benefit of a certain interventional strategy, or into an economic impact analysis of outputs. So how many jobs or revenue do we generate by having that intervention that saves us from losing, for example, commercial fishing profits? Then we also have cost data, which is generated through cost models. And the data from the cost models then feeds again into the cost-benefit analysis and into the economic impact analysis of inputs. So how many jobs do we generate by deploying aquaculture and moving these corals onto the reef, for example? So that's mainly for RRAP. And then finally, the coral outcomes directly from reef mod, but also the indicators then can be used in a cost-effectiveness analysis. So where we look, for example, is how much does it cost to save an additional square kilometers of reef given a certain strategy under CCIP. So now, and then all of these outputs then can flow into a trade-off analysis, and that can also take other outputs of other metrics or objectives to compare different strategies or interventions. So now what I want to talk a little bit today about is taking just some components of that big assessment framework, mainly cost effectiveness, production possibility, frontiers, and trade-off analysis, at the example of the performance of alternative CoTS culling strategies over a time frame from 2019 to 2050. So that's modeled by ReefMod and then feed into our cost effectiveness models. The performance here is measured by 3 indicators. So we have coral area saved in hectare, we have a number of outbreaking reefs avoided, and CoTS densities. And the effort is translated into costs in terms of dollars. Okay, so the manual CoTS control is implemented in ReefMod as closely as possible to the current CoTS control program. And if you have any questions about that, please ask Tina. She or attend tomorrow's talk at 1:30. She will talk about that a little bit further. And then, so we assessed so far 16 strategies. There's 3 more to come. So again, if you're interested in more of this, Tina will talk about very exciting news about the additional 3 strategies which are not yet implemented in this assessment. So we have a group of spatial strategies. The first group is regional strategies. So we will basically have where do we apply the effort? So where do the divers go? Do they go across the whole GBR, which is imitates closely what's currently happening in the CoTS control program, so that's SGBR, and then any other variation of a regional focus or combination of different subregions. Then we have another spatial group, that's protection status, where we look at applying GBR-wide effort, but the one scenario is that only extractive use zones, and the other one is any but extractive use zones, to see if that makes an impact. And the third spatial group is following the outbreak front. So there we have 3 sub-strategies, depending on what the guiding principle is on where we apply the effort. So the first one is the guiding principle is priority reefs first. The second one is looking by highest density of CoTS, and the third is a combination of the 2. And finally, we have 2 effort sink scenarios. So basically, when we find more than 3 CoTS per tow, then we don't cull that reef. The first one and the second one, it's the same rule, but if we have a very high coral cover by more than 20%, we still cull it to the threshold. Okay, so if you want to know more about the design and the implementation of these control scenarios into ReefMod, please attend Tina's talk tomorrow. Okay, now let's have a look at some of the results. So we have these 16 scenarios, and this slide just shows you, if you look at the 3 different metrics, coral area, outbreaking reefs, and CoTS density, and looking at the annual averages across that time horizon from 2090 to 2050, we see the following. So the best strategies in terms of coral area would be the GBR-wide, followed by the 2 effort sink scenarios. And the worst one would be one of the outbreak front scenarios. This picture really changes when we look at avoiding outbreaking reefs. We see that suddenly the far north strategy, so focusing all the effort in the far north, is the best, and the worst would be, among others, the another outbreaking front scenario. And again, it looks very different when we look at CoTS densities. So now the best one is that which was the worst one under the maximizing coral area, and vice versa. So it really matters of what metrics you're looking at. So now if we look at cost effectiveness ratios, so coral area per $1,000 in this case, so what we can observe is that at the start, it's a really poor performance in terms, it's very expensive. But then it rises very quickly up, it plateaus on the early 30s, and then it sort of declines again in the mid 40s. So it's a very steep curve going up, so cost effectiveness improves over time to a certain point. And this is a trend that's observed across all strategies. Now, if we calculate these ratios for all scenarios, we can see like the best strategy is, of course, the GBR-wide one, because we apply the same amount of effort across all scenarios. You can see that it costs about $2,340 per square kilometer per hectare of coral reef we're saving for the best strategy. The worst strategy, if we apply that, so if we assume that effort increases linearly and the gain increases in a linear fashion, that we would, if we applied the worst strategy compared to the GBR-wide strategy, we would have to pay $23 million more per year. And that's not discounted. So choosing the right strategy really matters. So now we can also have a look at relative cost effectiveness scores. So here we're basically setting the best strategy to 1 and then can see the percentage of performance across the other strategies. So for example, the regional central-south strategy only produces 50% of what the GBR-wide strategy would produce. And we can do the same for maximizing against outbreaking reefs avoided and CoTS density. So we get very different results. We also had a look whether it differs, whether we include all reefs or only priority reefs into that assessment. And when we after maximizing coral area, that really doesn't make a difference. And we also looked at some like the simulations that come from ReefMod. So for each scenario and each time step, we get 20 simulations. So that's the distribution of the simulations, and we did some statistical analysis. And all the strategies that have a green tick basically indicate that they are the best strategies, and they are not different from each other, but different from all other strategy on that slide. Okay, so now back to outbreaking reefs avoided. So here we do indeed see that if we only focus on priority reefs, that we would choose a different strategy if we want to maximize avoiding outbreaking reefs. And again, we looked at distributions. Again, those with green ticks are the best ones, and they are not statistically different from each other, but from all other strategies. And here you can also see, if you look at the first green tick, the OFAR strategy has a very wide distribution, so much more uncertain than, for example, the far north, RFN, the third one. Okay, so now another thing I want to present here, what's possible with our toolbox, is to construct a production possibility frontier. So what's that? So a production possibility frontier basically shows you two products and then shows you the maximum output you can generate. So everything that's on the line is productively efficient, and everything that's to the left of the line is not efficient, so you could do better. So, and then what we can do is we can show, okay, what's the trade-off of producing, using the far north strategy compared to the GBR-wide strategy. So what we're seeing here is if we implement the far north strategy, we're basically sacrificing 58,000 hectares of coral reef saved, but gain about 1,200 outbreaking reefs. So by choosing, because of scarcity, we can't patrol all or cull all reefs. We have to make choices, and these choices have consequences in terms of opportunity cost, which in the case of these two alternative strategies is 47 hectares per outbreaking reef. So what if we decide, or we want to maximize against two goals, so coral area saved and outbreaking reefs avoided? We can do that as well, and we see the results for that. So there's 5 strategies that are equally productively efficient, but again, they still imply this opportunity cost, depending on what you choose. So these productive efficiencies has nothing about allocative efficiency, meaning what do people actually value. This analysis assumes that they all have equal preferences attached to them, so values equally distributed. So attaching these values, that would be the step of a cost-benefit analysis where that gets introduced. So in conclusion, it matters what metrics you optimize against, and there are trade-offs involved. It matters if you focus just on priority reefs or on all reefs, if you maximize for coral cover, and if you want to maximize against the both goals. The GBR-wide strategy still looks like be one of the best, and if you're just interested in coral area saved, at the moment, the GBR-wide strategy is the best, but it might change when Tina gives me the data for the additional 3 strategies. Something else might come out. Okay, that's all from me. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Gabriela. Any questions for Gabriela? Barbara?
That's okay. Nobody knows. It's fine. Just do your best.
Gabby, did all your scenarios assume that the investment was consistent over time, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a fixed budget of dive hours. Yes.
It would be interesting to look at the effects of, say, a political interruption to funding or something like that. Yeah.
Would be interesting to do. So if would need to coordinate with the reef mod people here if they're willing to run more scenarios. But yeah, no, that would be interesting. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
We did interpret some of the model runs back during this when we were still trying to get a long-running program up. Interpret it through that lens.
Yeah, and we also had to make some simplifying assumptions regarding the cost. So the costs per dive are the same across all scenarios, which is probably not true. If you're going far north, it's probably more expensive, but the relative cost of going further out really are pale against the total cost of doing that. So I don't think it's worth the effort actually making that more explicit and spending much time and money on getting the cost model more differentiated, but something to think about. Yeah. Yes.
Great presentation, Gabby.
Thank you.
Question on the allocative efficiency.
Yeah.
Is there a pathway for expanding to that dimension, that lens in the cost space?
It's underway.
Okay.
It's just not finalized, but next like 6 weeks and we have the final report, by then we'll be done.
No pressure.
No pressure, no, but that's definitely an important step. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Gabi.
Thank you.